My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old. Last weekend, I walked into my sister's wedding after 10 years of complete silence between us. Nobody recognized me at first, which honestly wasn't surprising considering how much I'd changed. The last time my family saw me, I was an awkward 18-year-old they'd labeled their biggest disappointment. But standing there in my designer dress, watching my sister Emma say her vows, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. They had no idea who I'd become, and frankly, I wasn't sure I was ready to tell them. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't believe what happened when my identity was finally revealed. Growing up in suburban Michigan, our house always felt like it had two different climates. There was Emma's side, where sunshine perpetually streamed through the windows, and then there was my corner, where it seemed like storm clouds gathered daily. Emma wasn't just my older sister. She was the golden child who could do absolutely no wrong in our parents' eyes. By the time I was 15 and she was 17, the contrast between us couldn't have been more stark. Emma was valedictorian material, with her perfectly straight blonde hair that never seemed to have a bad day, while I struggled with thick brown curls that had a mind of their own. She glided through the hallways of Central High like she owned them homecoming queen crown practically permanent on her head, while I shuffled along trying not to trip over my own feet. The physical differences were just the beginning. Emma wore a size 2 and looked like she'd stepped out of a teen magazine, while I was a size 14, desperately trying to hide behind oversized sweaters. My thick glasses made my eyes look enormous, and the braces I'd had for 3 years weren't helping my confidence any. To make matters worse, my skin seemed to be in a permanent state of rebellion, breaking out right before every important school event. But what hurt more than the physical differences was how our parents treated our respective achievements. When Emma scored a perfect SAT score, Dad took her out for a celebration dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town. When I managed to pull my GPA up to a 3.2, Mom simply said, "That's nice, honey," without looking up from her magazine. Emma's bedroom walls were covered with ribbons, trophies, and certificates. Mine had a few participation awards that seemed to mock me every time I looked at them. I'll never forget the dinner conversation that happened during my junior year. Emma had just been accepted to some prestigious summer program at Northwestern, and naturally, it was all anyone could talk about. Dad was practically bursting with pride, going on and on about how this would look on her college applications. Mom was already planning how to tell all her friends at the country club. Then, almost as an afterthought, Mom turned to me and said, "Sarah, maybe you should consider a summer job instead of just sitting around the house." The implication was clear. Emma was destined for greatness, while I was destined for mediocrity. I tried everything to gain their approval. I signed up for cheerleading tryouts, even though I knew I didn't have the coordination or the body type they were looking for. The other girls snickered when I stumbled through the routine, and I didn't make the team. I ran for student council president, spending weeks making colorful posters and practicing my speech. I came in dead last, receiving exactly 12 votes. I even joined the debate team thinking maybe intellectual pursuits would be my path to recognition. I was decent at research and had strong opinions, but my stage fright made me stumble over words during competitions. Each failure was met with the same response from my parents: disappointment mixed with a sort of resigned acceptance that this was just who I was. They never said it outright, but I could see it in their eyes. Emma was their success story. I was their consolation prize. The worst part was watching how effortlessly everything came to Emma. She didn't have to try out for cheerleading. They recruited her. She didn't run for student council. They begged her to join. She didn't struggle with debate. She was naturally articulate and confident. It was like she'd been born with some sort of magic that made everything golden, while I'd been cursed to turn everything I touched into disappointment. By the time senior year rolled around, I'd stopped trying to compete with Emma. There was no point. She was headed to greatness, and I was just trying to graduate and figure out what came next. Little did I know that graduation day would be the beginning of the end of my relationship with my family and the catalyst for a transformation none of us could have imagined. Graduation day started with such promise. For once, I had something to be genuinely excited about. While I wasn't valedictorian like Emma had been 2 years earlier, I'd managed to pull off something that surprised everyone, including myself. I'd been accepted to Michigan State University with a partial academic scholarship. It wasn't Harvard, and it wasn't the full ride Emma had received to Northwestern, but it was mine, and I'd earned it. I remember getting dressed that morning, carefully smoothing down my cap and gown, trying to imagine the pride on my parents' faces when I told them about the scholarship. I'd been keeping it a secret, wanting to surprise them on this special day. Finally, I had something that would make them see me differently. The ceremony itself was typical long, boring speeches about the future and our potential. When they called my name, I walked across that stage with more confidence than I'd felt in years. I could see my parents in the audience, and while they were clapping, it was nothing like the standing ovation Emma had received. Still, I told myself this was my moment. After the ceremony, families gathered on the school lawn for photos and celebrations. This was when I planned to drop my scholarship news. I found my parents near the flagpole, already surrounded by other families congratulating Emma, who had come home from Northwestern just for my graduation. "Mom, Dad," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. "I have something amazing to tell you." Dad was adjusting his camera settings, preparing for family photos. "Can it wait, Sarah? We want to get these pictures while the lighting is good." But I couldn't wait. I got into Michigan State with a partial academic scholarship. Isn't that incredible? The reaction was nothing like what I'd imagined. Mom gave me a weak smile and said, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey." But her tone was the same one she used when I told her I'd cleaned my room. Dad nodded absently and said, "Michigan State is a good school, very practical." Practical. Not prestigious. Not impressive. Practical. Meanwhile, Emma squeezed my shoulder and said, "That's great, sis." But even her enthusiasm felt hollow compared to the celebration she'd received for her full ride to Northwestern. Then came the photo session, and this is where things started to fall apart. Dad was directing everyone's positions like he was shooting a magazine cover. "Emma, you stand in the center. You look beautiful, sweetheart. Sarah, maybe you could stand behind your sister." "Yes, that's better." Behind. Always behind. My Uncle Mike, Dad's brother, showed up just as we were finishing photos. He was one of those relatives who said exactly what he thought, consequences be damned. He looked at the family portrait on Dad's camera screen and chuckled. "Well, at least one of your kids turned out right, Tom. Emma's going to set the world on fire. Northwestern, can you believe it?" I felt my cheeks burn with shame and anger. I was standing right there in my cap and gown, having just graduated, having just received a scholarship, and I was invisible. But the moment that shattered everything happened later that evening. I was upstairs in my room trying to process the day's events when I heard Mom on the phone downstairs. Her voice carried up through the old house's thin walls. "Oh yes, we're so proud of Emma. She's doing incredible things at Northwestern. Sarah. Well, she graduated today, so that's something. She's going to Michigan State in the fall. It's not Northwestern, but it's a perfectly fine state school. That's something. Like graduation was some minor achievement barely worth mentioning. Like the scholarship was just a participation trophy." Something inside me snapped. I marched downstairs and found both my parents in the kitchen, Dad reading the newspaper, Mom tidying up after the day's festivities. "I heard what you said on the phone, Mom." She looked up confused. "What are you talking about, honey?" "About how Emma makes you proud, and I'm just something. About how my scholarship to Michigan State is just okay while Emma's achievements are worth celebrating." Dad folded his newspaper with an annoyed sigh. "Sarah, you're being dramatic. We're proud of you too." "No, you're not." The words exploded out of me with years of pent-up frustration. "You've never been proud of me. Emma gets standing ovations, and I get polite applause. Emma gets celebration dinners, and I get, 'That's nice, honey,' without you even looking up. Emma gets the center of family photos, and I get shoved to the back like I'm some embarrassing relative you have to tolerate." Mom's face flushed. "Sarah, that's not fair. We love you both equally. Love maybe, but respect pride." Those are reserved for Emma. I was crying now, but I didn't care. Do you have any idea how it feels to grow up knowing you're the disappointment? To know that no matter what you achieve, it will never be good enough because Emma already did it better. Dad stood up, his face dark with anger. That's enough, Sarah. You've always been the problem child in this family. Look at yourself compared to Emma. She works hard, she's dedicated, she doesn't throw tantrums when things don't go her way. The words hit me like a physical blow. Problem child. That's how he saw me. Mom, instead of defending me, just shook her head sadly. Maybe college will teach you how to make something of yourself, Sarah. Maybe being away from home will help you mature and stop feeling sorry for yourself. I stared at them both, seeing clearly for the first time how they really viewed me. Not as their daughter who had just graduated and earned a scholarship, but as a problem to be solved, a disappointment to be managed. If you can't appreciate this family, Dad continued, maybe you don't belong in it. The silence that followed was deafening. They'd essentially just disowned me on my graduation day. Over what? Over me finally standing up for myself, over me pointing out the obvious favoritism that had shaped my entire childhood. I went upstairs and started packing. If they didn't think I belonged in their family, then I'd make it easy for them. While they sat downstairs probably discussing how dramatic and ungrateful I was, I stuffed everything I owned into 3 suitcases and 2 garbage bags. I left that night driving my beat-up Honda Civic toward Chicago with $800 in savings from my part-time job at the local grocery store. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. They'd made it clear I was the problem, so I was removing the problem. As I drove through the darkness toward my uncertain future, I made myself a promise I would become someone they couldn't dismiss, someone they couldn't call a disappointment, someone they couldn't shove to the back of family photos. I just had no idea how much that promise would change everything. Chicago in late June felt like a foreign country compared to suburban Michigan. The city was huge, loud, and completely indifferent to one scared 18-year-old girl with 3 suitcases and a wounded heart. I found a tiny studio apartment in Rogers Park, barely bigger than my childhood bedroom, for $400 a month. The building was old and the neighborhood wasn't great, but it was mine. My first year at Michigan State was brutal. While other freshmen were figuring out dorm life and making friends at orientation events, I was working 3 jobs to pay tuition, rent, and basic living expenses. I worked mornings at the campus bookstore, afternoons, catering weekend events for a local company, and late nights at an all-night diner near campus. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, both literally and figuratively. The loneliness was overwhelming. I'd call my parents' house twice during freshman year, hoping maybe they'd softened, maybe they missed me, maybe they wanted to reconcile. Both times Mom answered and the conversations were stilted and cold. She'd ask basic questions about school in a tone that suggested she was going through the motions of maternal concern. When I mentioned how hard I was working to pay for everything, she simply said, "Well, that's character building, I suppose." No offer to help. No expression of pride that I was making it on my own. Just polite disinterest. After the second call, I stopped trying. But something interesting started happening during my sophomore year. I enrolled in a business ethics class taught by Professor Martinez, a woman in her 50s who had worked in corporate marketing before becoming an educator. She was the first teacher who seemed to see potential in me that I didn't even know existed. "Sarah," she said after I'd presented a project analyzing ethical issues in pharmaceutical advertising, "you have an instinct for understanding consumer psychology. Have you considered majoring in marketing?" I hadn't actually. I'd been stumbling through general education requirements, unsure what I wanted to study. But Professor Martinez saw something in my work that intrigued her. She encouraged me to take more business classes, to consider internships, to think bigger than I'd ever allowed myself to think. During junior year, I landed a summer internship at a small advertising agency in Chicago. It was unpaid, which meant I had to keep my other jobs, but it was my first taste of the marketing world. I discovered I had a talent for understanding what motivated people, for seeing the emotional connections between brands and consumers. My physical transformation happened gradually and almost accidentally. The stress and limited budget meant I lost weight without trying. I finally got contact lenses to replace my thick glasses, partly for practical reasons, easier to work long hours without glasses sliding down my nose, but mostly because I was tired of hiding behind them. My skin cleared up as I got older and learned to manage stress better. But the most significant change was internal. I was gaining confidence through small successes. The breakthrough moment came during my senior year when I entered a statewide marketing competition. The challenge was to create a complete campaign for a local nonprofit. I chose a literacy program for underprivileged children, and I poured everything I had into that project. I worked on it for months, refining every detail, crafting a message that was both emotionally compelling and strategically sound. When they announced I'd won first place, beating teams from Northwestern University of Michigan and other prestigious schools, I almost couldn't believe it. The prize included a cash award and, more importantly, meetings with several major advertising firms in Chicago. 3 companies offered me jobs before I even graduated. I chose Thompson & Associates, a mid-sized firm with a reputation for innovative campaigns and a collaborative culture. Starting salary: $55,000 a year, more money than I'd ever imagined making. On graduation day, I walked across that stage alone. No family in the audience, no celebration dinner afterward. But for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely proud of what I'd accomplished. I'd earned my degree while working multiple jobs, graduated with honors, and had a real career waiting for me. I'd done it entirely on my own. As I drove back to Chicago after graduation, I realized something had shifted inside me. I was no longer the awkward, insecure girl who'd left home 4 years earlier. I was becoming someone new, someone confident, someone successful. I just didn't know how dramatically that transformation would continue. My first day at Thompson & Associates felt like stepping into a different world. The offices were sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Everyone dressed impeccably and spoke in the confident tones of people who knew they were good at their jobs. I was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. The learning curve was steep, but I threw myself into the work with the same determination that had gotten me through college. I volunteered for every project, stayed late every night, and studied successful campaigns like other people studied scripture. My colleagues initially saw me as the eager new kid, but that changed quickly when I started delivering results. My first major breakthrough came 6 months into the job. We were pitching Honda for their new compact car launch, competing against 2 bigger agencies. I suggested an approach that focused on the emotional journey of young adults gaining independence, rather than just the car's features. The tagline I proposed was, "Your first real adventure starts here." Honda loved it. We got the account, and suddenly I wasn't just the new kid anymore. I was the associate who'd helped land a major client. Working at Thompson introduced me to a completely different social world. My colleagues invited me to gallery openings, wine tastings, and networking events. I learned to navigate conversations about art, politics, and culture. I invested in a professional wardrobe, trading my college sweatshirts and jeans for tailored blazers and elegant dresses. I got my hair professionally styled for the first time and learned about makeup from a woman at Nordstrom who treated it like high art. But the most significant change was meeting James Mitchell, the creative director, who worked on the Honda campaign with me. James was 6'2" with dark hair and the kind of easy confidence I'd always admired in others. He was brilliant at his job, funny, and incredibly kind. Our working relationship developed into friendship, and friendship gradually became something deeper. "You know what I like about you, Sarah," he said one evening as we worked late on a Microsoft campaign. "You never assume anything is impossible. Most people in this business get cynical, but you still believe we can change minds and touch hearts with the right message." That Microsoft campaign became another defining moment in my career. We were tasked with repositioning their business software as essential for creative entrepreneurs, not just corporate IT departments. I developed a campaign called Create Your Empire that featured real small business owners who'd built something amazing using Microsoft tools. The campaign was a massive success, generating buzz in industry publications and driving significant sales increases. I was promoted to senior account executive at 24, making $80,000 a year, living in a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. James and I had been dating for 2 years when he proposed. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was perfect for us. We were walking along Lake Michigan on a Sunday morning discussing a campaign we were developing when he suddenly stopped and said, "Sarah, I want to spend my life creating beautiful things with you." The ring was elegant and understated exactly what I would have chosen. More importantly, James saw me as his creative and intellectual equal, his partner in every sense of the word. No one had ever made me feel so valued, so appreciated, so genuinely loved. But the biggest breakthrough was yet to come. In my 5th year at Thomson, we had the opportunity to pitch Apple for their small business initiative. It was a long shot. We were a mid-sized Chicago agency competing against the biggest names in advertising. But I'd been studying Apple's brand philosophy for years, and I had an idea. Instead of focusing on technology, I proposed we focus on the moment when a creative idea becomes reality. The campaign concept was Think Different, Build Different, showcasing diverse entrepreneurs who used Apple products to bring their visions to life. Apple chose us. The account was worth $12 million annually, the biggest in the agency's history. I was promoted to partner track at 25, making $120,000 plus bonuses and profit sharing. By 27, I was living in a penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. The awkward teenager who'd once hidden behind thick glasses and oversized sweaters had become a confident woman who commanded boardrooms and created campaigns that influenced millions of people. The transformation was so complete that sometimes I'd catch my reflection in store windows and be surprised by the poised professional looking back at me. I wore tailored suits that fit perfectly. My hair was styled by one of Chicago's top colorists, and I carried myself with the confidence that comes from knowing you're very good at what you do. When Advertising Age featured me in their 30 Under 30 Marketing Mavens issue, the accompanying photo showed a woman I barely recognized as my former self. The article called me a rising star with an intuitive understanding of consumer emotion and a track record of breakthrough campaigns. Success had brought me everything I thought I wanted: financial security, professional recognition, a loving relationship with James, and the respect of my peers. But it had also raised questions I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. I rarely thought about my family anymore, at least not consciously. I'd built a new life with new people who valued what I brought to the table. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, almost exactly 10 years after I'd left home, my assistant handed me an envelope that would change everything again. The return address was one I recognized but hadn't seen in a decade: my childhood home in Michigan. Inside was an elegant wedding invitation on heavy cream paper. Emma was getting married. The wedding invitation sat on my desk for 3 days before I could bring myself to really look at it. Emma Catherine Williams was marrying Marcus James Patterson at the Riverside Country Club on Saturday, May 15th. The same country club where we'd attended family events throughout our childhood, where Emma had celebrated her sweet 16 while I served cake to her friends. I studied every detail of the invitation, trying to read between the carefully scripted lines. This was the venue where our extended family always gathered, which meant everyone would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends who remembered the awkward teenager I used to be. The thought both terrified and intrigued me. James found me staring at the invitation that evening when he came home from a client dinner. "Important mail?" he asked, loosening his tie and settling onto the couch beside me. I handed him the invitation without a word. He read it carefully, then looked up at me with understanding in his eyes. He knew my family history. I told him everything during one of our late-night conversations early in our relationship. "Are you thinking about going?" he asked gently. "I don't know. Part of me wants to see them to show them who I've become. But part of me thinks it's better to leave the past in the past." James was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Sarah, you're not the same person who left Michigan 10 years ago. You've built something incredible, and you've become someone remarkable. Maybe it's time they saw that." Over the next few weeks, the decision consumed my thoughts. I'd catch myself wondering what Emma looked like now, whether she was happy what kind of man she was marrying. I wondered if my parents had changed, if they'd ever regretted the way things ended between us. Most of all, I wondered if seeing them again would give me the closure I didn't even realize I needed. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made my decision. I was going. The preparation felt like getting ready for the most important presentation of my career. I spent hours selecting the perfect dress, finally choosing a navy blue silk piece from a boutique in River North. It was elegant without being flashy expensive, without being obvious sophisticated, without trying too hard. I had my hair and makeup done by the same team that had prepared me for the Advertising Age photo shoot. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my full-length mirror and barely recognized myself. The woman looking back at me was poised, successful, beautiful, in a way that came from confidence and accomplishment, rather than just good genetics. I was everything my teenage self had dreamed of becoming. The drive to my hometown felt like traveling through time. Every landmark triggered memories: the McDonald's, where Emma and I had shared Happy Meals as children, the park where I'd learned to ride a bike, the high school where I'd graduated and been dismissed as unremarkable. Now I was returning as someone who'd graced magazine covers and commanded million-dollar accounts. The Riverside Country Club looked exactly as I remembered: all manicured lawns and old money elegance. Cars were already filling the parking lot, and I recognized several vehicles that belonged to extended family members. My hands were shaking slightly as I parked my BMW and checked my appearance one final time. Walking through the club's entrance felt surreal. The same crystal chandeliers hung in the foyer. The same oil paintings of long-dead club members lined the walls. But I was different now, and that difference felt like armor protecting me from old insecurities. The ceremony was being held in the club's garden pavilion. I slipped in quietly and found a seat near the back, just as I'd planned. From there, I could observe without being immediately noticed, giving myself time to process seeing my family again after so many years. Emma looked beautiful in a traditional white gown, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon. But she also looked somehow smaller than I remembered, less luminous. Maybe it was just the passage of time, or maybe she'd been diminished by the ordinary challenges of adult life that had made me stronger. My parents sat in the front row, and the years had clearly taken their toll. Dad's hair was completely gray now, and Mom had gained weight and developed the slightly defeated posture of someone who'd settled for less than she'd dreamed of. They looked like regular middle-aged people, not the intimidating authority figures who'd once made me feel so small. As Emma and Marcus exchanged vows, I found myself studying the other guests, cataloging the changes a decade had brought. My cousins looked older. Some had children now, others had the soft edges that come with suburban contentment. These were the people who'd once made me feel inadequate, and now they just looked ordinary. The ceremony concluded without incident. I'd successfully attended my sister's wedding without being recognized, which felt like a small victory. But as guests moved toward the reception hall, I realized the real test was just beginning. The reception would be longer, more social, with more opportunities for conversation and recognition. I positioned myself strategically at a table near the edge of the reception hall, close enough to observe but far enough away to avoid immediate detection. The conversations around me were typical wedding small talk: compliments on the bride's dress, speculation about the honeymoon destination, updates on children and jobs and mortgages. What struck me most was how provincial it all seemed. These people who had once represented the pinnacle of success and sophistication in my teenage mind were discussing soccer practice schedules and lawn care services. Their concerns were so small compared to the campaigns I managed and the clients I served. As the evening progressed, I began to relax. Several people had glanced my way with vague recognition, the way you might look at someone who seems familiar but can't be placed. My Aunt Carol did a double take when she passed my table, but she didn't approach. My cousin David's wife asked if I was with the bride or groom's side, and I gave a deliberately vague answer about being an old friend. The real moment of truth came during the father-daughter dance, when I would finally come face to face with the past I'd spent 10 years rebuilding from. Marcus Patterson was exactly the type of man I'd expected Emma to marry. He was handsome in a conventional way, with neat brown hair and the kind of smile that suggested he'd never questioned whether he deserved good things. He wore his tuxedo, comfortably moved through the reception with easy confidence, and seemed genuinely happy to be the center of attention. I was watching Emma and Dad dance to Butterfly Kisses when Marcus approached my table. He'd been making rounds thanking guests for coming, playing the role of gracious groom to perfection. When he reached me, his expression was friendly but curious. "I don't think we've been introduced," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus, the lucky groom." I shook his hand and smiled. "Congratulations on your wedding. It's been beautiful." "Thank you. I have to ask, you seem familiar. Do you know Emma well?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with more meaning than he could possibly understand. This was the moment I'd been simultaneously anticipating and dreading since I'd decided to attend the wedding. "More than you might think," I replied, keeping my voice light but allowing just a hint of mystery to creep in. Marcus's curiosity was clearly piqued. "I feel like we've met before. Are you from around here? Did you go to school with Emma?" Other family members were starting to notice our conversation. I could see heads turning in our direction, people trying to place me, whispers beginning to circulate. The moment was building towards something inevitable, and I found myself both terrified and exhilarated by what was coming. "I did grow up here," I said carefully. "I graduated from Central High." "Really? What year Emma graduated in 2003? 2005. Marcus's brow furrowed as he tried to do the math to figure out how I fit into Emma's story. Emma herself was approaching now, having noticed her new husband engaged in conversation with an unfamiliar guest. "Marcus, who's your new friend?" Emma asked, slipping her arm through his. She looked directly at me, and I could see her trying to place my face. There was something familiar about me, but she couldn't quite make the connection. This was it. The moment when 10 years of transformation would meet the reality of my past. I could have deflected, could have made an excuse and left, could have maintained my anonymity and slipped back into my new life unchanged. But something inside me, perhaps the same defiance that had driven me to succeed, made a different choice. "Hello, Emma," I said quietly. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her face went pale, her eyes widened, and her hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Sarah," she whispered. "Oh my God. Sarah, is that really you?" The conversation around us began to die away as people sensed something significant was happening. Marcus looked confused, glancing between his wife and me as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Wait," he said slowly. "Sarah, as in your sister Sarah." Emma nodded mutely, still staring at me as if I were a ghost. Which in a way I suppose I was. The ghost of their disappointing family member returned from the dead as someone they didn't recognize. "This is your sister." Marcus's voice was filled with disbelief. "The one you told me about, the one who—" He trailed off, realizing he was about to say something that might be inappropriate. But I could fill in the blanks. The one who was a disappointment. The one who couldn't make anything of herself. The one who'd run away because she couldn't handle being part of a successful family. By now, our conversation had attracted more attention. I could see my parents pushing through the crowd, having heard Emma's shocked exclamation. Aunts and uncles were craning their necks to get a better look. The whispers were spreading like wildfire through the reception. Mom reached us first, and the expression on her face was a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been shame. "Sarah," she said, her voice barely audible. "Is it really you?" Dad appeared beside her, and for the first time in 10 years, I was looking into the faces of my parents. They looked older, more fragile, less formidable than they had in my memories. But they also looked guilty, as if my presence was forcing them to confront something they'd prefer to forget. "Hello, Mom. Dad." My voice was steady, controlled, polite, but not warm. The crowd around us was growing larger. Extended family members were beginning to recognize me, their expressions ranging from shock to curiosity to barely concealed excitement at the drama unfolding before them. We had no idea. Mom started, then stopped, unsure what to say next. "We didn't know where you were," We tried to find you. That was a lie, and we all knew it. They'd never tried to find me. They'd never hired a private investigator or reached out to mutual friends or even checked with the college they knew I was attending. They'd let me disappear because it was easier than dealing with the conflict I represented. "You look," Dad began, then paused, clearly struggling to process the transformation. "You look wonderful, Sarah. Very successful." Successful. The word that had always been reserved for Emma was now being applied to me, and I could see how much it cost him to say it. Marcus was still trying to piece together what was happening. "I don't understand. Emma, you told me your sister was—" Again he stopped himself before saying something he'd regret. "What did she tell you about me, Marcus?" I asked, my voice calm but with an edge that everyone could hear. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Emma looked mortified, and my parents looked like they wanted to disappear. The family secrets were about to be aired in front of everyone, and there was no way to stop it now. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 10 years, whether I'd realized it or not. The moment when I would finally force my family to confront who they'd been and who I'd become. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Marcus glanced at Emma, clearly seeking guidance on how to navigate this suddenly treacherous conversation. Emma's face had gone from pale to bright red, and she was wringing her hands nervously. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, we should talk privately." "No," I said firmly. "I think we've had enough private family conversations. I'd like to hear what you told your husband about me. After all, these are all the same people who were here 10 years ago when I left. They remember." Uncle Mike, who had made that cutting remark at my graduation, pushed forward through the crowd. "Well, I'll be damned. Sarah Williams, you clean up nice, kid." There was something patronizing in his tone that instantly transported me back to being 18 and hurt and angry. But I wasn't 18 anymore, and I wasn't hurt anymore. I was someone who had learned to command rooms full of executives and negotiate million-dollar deals. "Thank you, Uncle Mike. I remember your comment at my graduation about how at least one of my parents' kids turned out right. I've always wondered what you'd think of how I actually turned out." Mike's face flushed. He clearly hadn't expected me to remember, let alone call him out in front of everyone. Marcus, meanwhile, was staring at me with growing understanding. "You're the sister who works at some small company in Chicago, right? Emma said you were doing okay, but nothing special." The words hit the crowd like a bomb. Small company. Nothing special. The lies my family had told about me were now exposed in front of everyone. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent reception hall, "I'm a partner at Thompson & Associates. We're the agency behind the Honda First Real Adventure campaign, the Microsoft Create Your Empire initiative, and most recently Apple's Think Different, Build Different campaign for small business. Perhaps you've seen our work." The silence that followed was deafening. Several people in the crowd clearly recognized the campaigns I'd mentioned. These were major national advertisements that had been running for months. Marcus's jaw dropped. "You're Sarah Williams from Thompson & Associates. Your face was on the cover of Advertising Age last year. You were featured in the 30 Under 30 issue." I nodded calmly. "That's correct." "But Emma said," he began, then looked at his new wife with confusion and what might have been the beginning of anger. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah, I can explain." "Please do," I said. "Explain to your husband why you told him I was working at some small company doing nothing special. Explain why our parents told people I was attending a perfectly fine state school like it was some sort of consolation prize. Explain why I was shoved to the back of family photos like I was something to be ashamed of." Dad stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Sarah, that's enough. This is your sister's wedding day." "You're right, Dad. This is Emma's special day. Just like everything else was always Emma's special day. Her graduation, her college acceptance, her achievements, her celebrations. Tell me, Dad, do you remember what you said to me on my graduation day?" He opened his mouth and closed it clearly, not remembering the specific words that had been seared into my memory. You called me the problem child. You said maybe I didn't belong in this family. So I took your advice. I left, and I built a life where I wasn't a problem, where I wasn't a disappointment, where I wasn't standing in anyone's shadow. Mom was crying now. Sarah, we never meant for you to disappear. We were worried about you. Worried enough to call, to visit, to send a card on my birthday. I shook my head. Mom, you let me vanish because it was easier than dealing with the fact that you'd been wrong about me. The crowd around us was completely silent now, transfixed by the family drama unfolding before them. These were people who had known us for years, who had witnessed the favoritism, who had participated in it by praising Emma while ignoring me. Aunt Carol spoke up from the edge of the crowd. Sarah, honey, we all thought you were just going through a rebellious phase. We never imagined you'd stay away so long. A rebellious phase? I laughed, and there was no humor in it. I was rebellious because I wanted my parents to be proud of me, because I wanted to be valued for who I was instead of constantly compared to Emma. Emma finally found her voice. Sarah, I'm sorry. I know things were hard for you growing up. I should have stood up for you more. Yes, you should have. But you didn't. You enjoyed being the golden child too much, to risk any of that spotlight shining on me. Marcus was looking at Emma with an expression I couldn't quite read. Emma, why didn't you tell me the truth about your sister? Emma's tears were flowing freely now. Because I was ashamed. I was ashamed of how we treated her, and I was ashamed that she'd become more successful than any of us. It was easier to pretend she was just getting by than to admit we'd been wrong about everything. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Finally, someone had said it out loud. They had been wrong about everything. Dad made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. Sarah, we're family. Families fight. Families make mistakes. But families also forgive. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who had once seemed so powerful and intimidating, who now just looked like an aging suburban father trying to save face at his daughter's wedding. You're right, Dad. Families do make mistakes. But families also celebrate each other's successes, support each other through challenges, and love each other unconditionally. You taught me that family isn't about blood or shared DNA. It's about people who see your worth and choose to celebrate it. I looked around the crowd at all the faces of people who had known me as a child and dismissed me as an adult. Then I looked back at my parents and Emma. I forgive you, I said quietly. I forgive all of you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means I'm choosing not to let your mistakes define my future anymore. The reception hall remained silent as I picked up my purse and prepared to leave. But before I walked away, I had one more thing to say. Emma, I hope you have a wonderful marriage. I hope Marcus treats you better than our family treated me. And I hope someday you understand that there was room for both of us to be successful, both of us to be loved, both of us to matter. I turned to go, but Emma's voice stopped me. Sarah, wait. Please don't leave like this again. I turned back to face her. Emma, I'm not the one who left. I'm not the one who gave up on family. I'm the one who survived it. And with that, I walked out of the Riverside Country Club for the second time in my life. But this time, I wasn't running away from anything. I was walking toward a future I'd built myself surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was. The drive back to Chicago felt different than any journey I'd ever taken. There was a lightness in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years, as if some weight I'd been carrying had finally been lifted. The confrontation at Emma's wedding hadn't gone the way I'd imagined it might, but it had given me something I didn't know I needed: complete closure. James was waiting for me when I got home, having ordered Chinese takeout and opened a bottle of the wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. He took one look at my face and knew immediately that something fundamental had shifted. How did it go? He asked, pulling me into his arms. It's over, I said simply. It's finally over. I told him everything that had happened at the reception, from Marcus's initial confusion to Emma's tearful admission to my parents' failed attempts to control the narrative. James listened without interruption, occasionally shaking his head in amazement. "I'm proud of you," he said when I finished. "You handled that with more grace than they deserved." Over the following weeks, I received several calls from family members. Emma called twice, leaving long voicemails that I didn't return. Mom called once, a stilted conversation where she tried to apologize without actually taking responsibility for anything specific. Dad never called at all. I thought I might feel guilty about disrupting Emma's wedding, but I didn't. The truth had a way of demanding to be told, and I'd simply been its messenger. Besides, if Emma was embarrassed by the reality of our family dynamic, perhaps she should have worked harder to change it when she had the chance. The most surprising call came from Marcus 3 weeks after the wedding. He was calling from his office, he said, and Emma didn't know he was reaching out. "I've been doing some research on your work," he said. "I had no idea about the campaigns you've created, the recognition you've received. Emma's been economical with the truth about a lot of things, apparently." "I'm sorry you were put in that position," I told him. "It's not your fault that you were misinformed. Sarah, I want you to know that I think what your family did to you was wrong. I also think Emma knows it was wrong, even if she can't quite bring herself to say so clearly." I appreciated Marcus's honesty, but I also felt sorry for him. He was beginning to see cracks in the foundation of the family he'd married into, and that couldn't be easy. As spring turned to summer, I found myself thinking less and less about the wedding and its aftermath. The validation I'd sought from my family turned out to be something I didn't actually need anymore. I had built a life filled with people who appreciated my contributions, who celebrated my successes, who valued my thoughts and opinions. James and I started planning our own wedding, a small ceremony that would include only the people who truly mattered to us, colleagues who had become friends, mentors who had believed in me and the chosen family we'd created in Chicago. There would be no obligatory relatives, no complicated family dynamics, no one who needed to be convinced of our worth. One evening in late July, as I was working late at the office on a campaign for a sustainable fashion startup, I realized I was genuinely happy. Not the desperate, striving happiness of someone trying to prove themselves, but the quiet contentment of someone who knows exactly who they are and is comfortable with that person. The scared 18-year-old who had left home with 3 suitcases and $800 felt like a character from someone else's story. The woman I'd become had been forged through struggle, shaped by determination and refined by success. But most importantly, she'd been liberated by the understanding that other people's opinions, even family members' opinions, couldn't define her worth. I never did send a wedding gift to Emma and Marcus. Instead, I made a donation to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. It seemed like a better way to honor the journey I'd taken and the lessons I'd learned. The deepest truth I discovered was that family isn't about shared genetics or childhood memories or holiday traditions. Real family consists of people who see your potential when you can't see it yourself, who celebrate your victories without reservation, who support you through failures without judgment, and who love you not in spite of who you are, but because of who you are. My parents and Emma had never been that kind of family to me, and that was their loss more than mine. I'd found my real family in the colleagues who'd become collaborators, the mentors who'd become friends, and the man who'd become my partner in every sense of the word. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the permission to walk away from people who don't value what you bring to the table. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to keep fighting for relationships with people who've already decided you're not worth fighting for. I learned that success isn't about proving wrong the people who doubted you. Real success is about building a life so fulfilling that their doubts become irrelevant. It's about surrounding yourself with people who knew your worth before you had to prove it to them. The girl who once stood in the back of family photos because she wasn't considered worthy of the center had become a woman who commanded the center of boardrooms, conference stages, and her own life. And she'd done it not to show anyone else what they'd missed, but to show herself what was possible when you stop asking for permission to be extraordinary. That's the most important lesson I can share. Don't wait for other people to recognize your value. Don't spend years trying to earn love that should have been given freely. Don't shrink yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold your full potential. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is believe in yourself when no one else does. Invest in your own growth, when no one else will, and build the life you deserve instead of waiting for someone else to offer it to you. 10 years after leaving my childhood home, I'd finally found my way to a place where I belonged completely and unconditionally. And that place wasn't a location on a map. It was the space I'd created within myself where criticism couldn't reach, where doubt couldn't take root, and where love could grow without conditions or reservations. Have you ever felt like the outsider in your own family? Have you had to choose between staying in toxic relationships and building a healthier life for yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding your own path to happiness. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you are worthy of love, success, and happiness exactly as you are. The people who can't see that are missing out on knowing someone truly remarkable.